can't make too many comments about what we're about to see this weekend. We've had a brief look at the annual report today at the Coordinating Committee this morning. But in fact, what we were actually seeing as the numbers were shown across the screen, the big driver to the improvement in hazard reduction has been the rollout of the risk plan model in 2010. Up till 2010, we really didn't have, we only had some pilots in 2007, 2008 and 2009. But this is the map-based tenure blind model. Prior to that, we had a DES model with the guidelines driving it. And it's the guidelines which are where the Canobolas plan came from. So those guidelines are quite clear. And when you look at the numbers in the last 7, 8, 9 and 10 and 11, we're actually seeing a monumental lift in numbers, quite a significant lift in numbers. So what we'd always said at the Coordinating Committee level is that the risk plan model that we were developing in 2003, 4, 5, 6, when it was rolled out, we'd see an increase in activity, and it's there.
I don't disagree.
It's there.
Okay, the lady in the front will make a comment.
Thank you. Scylla Kinross. I'm representing the Nature Conservation Council and I'm on the Canobolas Zone Bushfire Management Committee. One of the things we're very pleased about with this new submission is the new review is that, in fact, that it's not just going to be based on hectares alone, because hectares alone, in fact, as you know, won't really give you an answer. And if you treat the same area every 3 years, you'll get through your hectares really quickly because it's much easier to treat an area that's been done 2 years ago than it has been 3 years ago. If you treat an area that hasn't been done for 80 years, it's going to take a lot of resources and time and trouble to do that, and so it's going to be a lot harder. So just using hectares is a bit of a false economy, I think. One of the areas that, so we're very pleased that this review and this opportunity has come up. One of the areas of, I guess, that we have as of concern, particularly with this whole hectare approach, is with the land management zones. Now, the land management zones are sometimes sort of thrown into the pile as, okay, well, we need to burn these to get our targets. And that wasn't the original intention of the risk management plan. The land management zones are not strategic fire asset protection zones. They're not. They're areas where there are now, thank goodness, through the work of Bradstock and other people, there are thresholds for those vegetation. So we do know that that we can sort of burn a little bit safely within like 20 years or so. But that if the land management zone is being burnt for protection purposes, as it does sometimes happen within districts, then those land management zones should be reclassified as protection zones. Because if they're actually left as land management zones, and particularly when they're in national parks, where there are ecologically endangered communities or threatened fauna, then they should not be treated as protection zones, but they should actually be burnt purely for ecological reasons. Now, it may be that within those thresholds, that's fine. We can say, well, for ecological reasons, we need to burn this because it hasn't been burnt for 20 years, and so, yeah, we should go in and get stuck in. But there is a slight problem because the vegetation thresholds don't necessarily align up perfectly with endangered flora and fauna. And perhaps one of you could comment on that, but I would like to see more research into this alignment. So if we're going to use these vegetation thresholds as surrogates for total ecological communities, we need to be a little bit careful. That was all. Ross? So I don't know whether you want it as a comment or a question. But
no, that's all right. It's fine. Ross, do you want to comment on that?
Yes. That's a good point, and if you'd like to see more research, all donations will be great.
I can add something to that, and Ross will have more authority on the detail here. But we have in New South Wales only in the last 18 months to 2 years been able to get statewide, reliable, credible veg classification mapping data sets, and one of the next iterations is to actually have a good look at that veg layer, desired frequency threshold regimes across the landscape, and then use that as a trigger to start targeting and prioritising land management zone or broad area treatment regimes. And you do capture threatened species and other things in that area as well, because that's another layer of data that's incorporated into the risk management planning process. But there is no doubt that having fire frequency thresholds, particularly in land management zones, but not exclusively, but across the landscape, as a trigger for working out how to prioritise and start working out hazard reduction regimes is going to be important, because the fire frequency threshold can accommodate both planned and unplanned fire and actually be mapped and captured and what have you. We are already seeing, and in the next iteration of the plans, we are already seeing a rethink in a lot of areas around strategic fire advantage zones in terms of their validity and their relevance, but also it is not unreasonable in broad areas to have strategic fire advantage zones established, particularly where there are known, fire paths and other things to be encapsulated in that planning framework. So the sort of thing you're talking about will be captured, and in New South Wales, it was pleasing to see governments of both persuasions recognising the fact that simplistic approach to hectare alone is not a good measure of the effectiveness of hazard reduction. You need to look at hectares, but you can't look at that on its own, because otherwise what you end up doing is, as we've seen a lot of criticism coming out of other areas, you end up going out to burn large areas in locations that are inconsequential to anybody.
Exactly.
In order to just get a hectare target up. So
You haven't reduced the risk.
you need to capture both, and I think risk profiles are one thing, and then fire frequency threshold regimes and other considerations would actually lend itself to getting an enhanced balance in that regard.
Bruce?
Yeah, my name is Bruce Nagle and I come from Yagara, and I'm a member of the Canoblestone Bushfire Management Committee. I'd just like to make a few comments to get things into perspective a little bit. We firstly need to be mindful that Indigenous Australians have been burning patches of the landscape for 40,000 years before we came here. So there's nothing new about a bit of burning, and we shouldn't assume that burning is the only means of hazard reduction. Me being a farmer and the way the grain industry been, I'm more into grazing animals, and I know that my sheep and cattle and their grazing have dramatically reduced the foliage that might have otherwise burned through summer. So it is a part of, and we saw in the plan that David Hodey presented, the predominant landholders in the Canoblestone are private property owners, people like myself that have a mix of farming and grazing enterprise, and we go out of our way to reduce hazard on our land, not principally by, we do very little burning, but through the winter I'd been away for a few weeks, and I came home to find that the local Progress Association had passed a resolution they wanted to do some hazard reduction around Yagara. And David showed a slide and mentioned that 11 years ago we had a very serious fire. At the same time there was a very serious fire in the Kubang National Park. I know one morning I woke up early and heard the forecast, it's going to be 38 degrees and winds of 40, 50 kilometres. This is going to be a bad day, and that's when the National Park was alight. And sure enough, before midday there was a fire west of Yagara. We thought we had it under control a number of times, but the wind just blew stronger and that kept on going. Until there was a break in the westerly wind, and the fire stopped, and then somebody lit another fire, and it blew like mad from the south. And we were, it was a miracle that we didn't lose lives. I know one house that I attended, a brick house with a tile roof, the flames came over the roof and round the walls all at once, set everything in the garden alight, but the house didn't burn. We had a job to catch the property owner. He thought that everything was lost, but that was, so it was proper that the Progress Association should suggest we do some more hazard reduction, and that I would organise it when I got home. So we did that, and in one brigade in particular, there was a total changeover of their office bearers. Now, how am I going to get them to have a training month without a changeover trucks? None of them have driven the truck, let alone get the pump going. So I asked them and 5 other trucks to come and help us do this hazard reduction. And we had a few neighbours that were a little bit hesitant. So I went and had a yarn to the wall, they ended up being okay. Then there was a complaint from the Lachlan Livestock Health and Pest Authority to the office here in Orange, and there was nothing to complain about. One member of their staff had their knickers in the night over some other issue. When I rang the manager of that pest authority, I just informed him that I was going to do the burning, and the alternative was to not do it. And how many lost their lives in Victoria? 170 something. I'm not going to have that on my conscience. I'm going to burn. We're going to do it at a time when we can't keep it under control. The day we did the burn, the temperature was 15 degrees in the middle of September. We all needed to have a jumper on. But yet the flames were 10 or 15 feet high in patches. As I say, we talked to all the neighbours, we cleared around a few electric light poles and so on. So now, the grass is green again. And yes, we've scorched some leaves on some eucalypts, but eucalypts respond to burning. They recover very quickly. So, and in relation to the rapport with national parks, in the last 10 years it has improved out of sight. It hasn't been because somebody had issued a decree or an order, but because of the work like David Haley and Alex Green, and they've won the cooperation of all the players involved. That is how you get effective hazard reduction and a good working relationship with all players in the system. The only exception to that, and I spent a few weeks in China, and one guy summed it up very well. Here, we have a one-party government. And when that government makes a decision, you just need to get used to it. Now here, we live in a democratic society, so it is just a little bit different. But the cooperation that has been cultivated by these players in this, and also, we should meet them in the street before it made it happen.
Thanks, Bruce.
Chris Gooch, local volunteer. This is more a comment, I suppose. I've been around the service for many years. I've also been a part of services in other states. Seeing this rolled out across the state has made a huge improvement across the state, I believe. When I first joined with the service, there was nothing like this around. So I just take my hat off to you guys for actually rolling out throughout the state and trying to encourage other areas other than Canoblastone. Canoblastone has been doing a great job, but other areas to come on board and be a part of it, yeah, get it all going. But if you have a look in Queensland, what they've gone through recently in some of their fires, they haven't got anything like this up there at the moment. And yeah, I think they're going to start looking at New South Wales for guidance as to trying to do risk management plans. So yeah, well done.
Thank you. Kevin, did you?
Yeah, look, just coming back to a few things that have been said, I think one of the strengths of some of the early work that's been done here in this sort of region, and I'm familiar with some of Alex Green's work, Alex and Hart, is the fact that, and what's happening in RFS is there's a process going around where you actually assess what all the values and assets are in an area. And Victoria shamelessly stolen that from New South Wales and got an award for doing so.
And they won an award for it.
Well, they do that with everything.
Yeah, that's right.
That's all right. We'll pitch whatever's good. But I guess when you actually look at the statistics on the progress, the emphasis is still on house protection, I suppose. And I guess what we've got to try and move towards, and it's not an easy thing to move towards, but to come back to those assets and values and landscape. And I was surprised at a fire a number of years ago where there were 40 sheep were killed in a fire. What's 40 sheep? But these 40 sheep were actually key blood stock that had taken 100 years to basically build up. And you know, there's a difference between this 40 sheep and just another 40 sheep over here, if you like. And you don't necessarily know that. And it's the same up in the Mallee in Victoria, for example. We've got the black ear miner, which is you only find in long unburnt habitat. So one of the things in Victoria they were doing was actually burning around there to try and protect that habitat. And over in South Australia, there was an area where there was even better habitat for black ear miner, and about 8% of that habitat got burnt out in one fire. So some of the burning program that goes on needs to protect not just houses, but also other values and assets. And so it's a little more complicated than we've got here. And look, it's really complex, but I think we've got to always keep in mind, I think part of the strength of the process that's gone on in this region is the conversation between people with different interests and different understandings of the landscape. And you'll never get a perfect answer, but we need to come back to that. And I'm just a little conscious that when you show figures on how many dollars worth of houses you've sort of protected, it's only showing a slither of, an important part, but a slither of the bigger picture. And that's where I think we need to come back to what some of those environmental values are, and it's not just about protecting the houses, but we need to stop, prevent environmental losses as well, and as well as other economic and social, cultural type things. So I'd just like to throw that into the mix, and I think that was one of the outcomes of this process of looking at those targets and being able to report against how those other values have been protected as well. And I think some of the environmental values, for example, can also benefit from this process, and that would be a good outcome.
And picking up on your point, Kevin, one of the things that everybody is, and when I say everybody, I'm talking about other jurisdictions across Australia, is actually capturing and putting a value to other assets or value areas. So whether it's things like pine plantations, or whether it's the natural environment, or whether it's other agricultural or industry issues, utilities, water catchments, plantations, all those sorts of things, we don't yet actually, well, we do in part. We identify them as things in the local risk plan, but what we haven't got is how do we quantify the value of actually rating that and ameliorating the risk or addressing the risk for that, and that's a real challenge.
And I think you've gone part of the way already.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
I agree with you. It's a next move, which is a big one.